Okay, so in our series on making remote work work, we have now covered two of the three pillars required, that is practicality and legality, and we are finally on to productivity. We are now looking at how to make sure the work gets done and gets done properly in a remote working environment. In our last video, we covered how weak management systems might work in an office environment thanks to the benefit of group learning and in-person interaction. But unfortunately, your remote worker does not have these benefits, and remote work is not going to work in your firm unless you have a structured approach to that work and its management. So while we look at the productivity pillar, we are going to be looking at planning. We are going to take a look at planning workflow, which is processes and deadlines. We're going to look at performance. So we're looking at quality and improvement, and we're looking at engagement involving collaboration, communication, and well-being. But before we look at management, I want to take a look at the two biggest mistakes that firm owners make when it comes to hiring, because these are amplified when you are hiring a remote worker. If you have not yet read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, I highly recommend that you go and get yourself a copy. If you have read it, then you will know that I am about to plagiarize his explanation for the biggest mistake that we all make when it comes to hiring. We hire out of desperation. Now, Michael uses the example of Sarah the baker, but I am going to use the example of Susan the accountant. Susan is an accountant who does bookkeeping and taxes for her small business clients. She is excellent at her work, and she genuinely cares about her clients and takes the time to help them understand their numbers and help them use those numbers to grow their business. As a result, she has grown her little solo practice, and now she has managed to grow to the point that her business is just too big for her to handle it all. But it's still a little bit too small to actually afford hiring someone. So what Susan does is she keeps pushing on her own, doing everything until she's hit 12-hour days. She's skipping lunch and she's starting to forget what her children look like. At this point of desperation, Susan accepts that she cannot do this alone and she begins the hiring process. Susan is lucky. She finds a bookkeeper called Jane who's lovely, and they get on brilliantly. She dumps a pile of client files on Jane's desk and breathes a sigh of relief. Now, if Susan is out of the office visiting a client, Jane will answer the phone. If Jane is busy submitting VAT returns, Susan quickly updates event feeds. If Susan is on the phone with HMRC, then Jane will accept documents from a client and get them scanned and filed. It all works beautifully. Jane and Susan are an awesome team, and Susan gets her life back. Because they work together so well, the business grows some more, and eventually it outgrows the two of them. Again, Susan leaps straight into the hiring process without planning anything. This time she finds Amy. Amy is lovely. The three of them have a great working relationship. But 1 or 2 months later, Susan notices that things are going wrong. The work for the nicest clients is done and up to date, but the boring and fiddly clients are falling behind. The phone is answered and messages are taken, but no follow-up is ever done. So prospects are falling through the cracks and current clients are getting annoyed. VAT returns get submitted, but management reports aren't sent. And then when the reports are pulled, errors are found after the fact and returns need to be corrected. So despite having two team members, Susan ends up back on 12-hour days, no weekends, and an inability to go on holiday. So what went wrong? Both times Susan hired, she waited until she was desperate for help. Because she hired out of desperation, she didn't methodically and intentionally plan her hiring. Now, my personal experience of hiring was even worse because I was running a remote business, which meant that I could not train and mentor my new hires the way that Susan could sit with Amy and Jane. So I skipped the great team bit and I went straight to chaos. Because the problem is that when we hire out of desperation, we don't take the time to plan it properly. And if you hire someone without giving them a very clear job description, with a very clear set of duties and responsibilities, then that person is just going to end up doing the work they like doing, not the work that is required. And you can't hold them accountable for work that isn't done because you never made them responsible for it in the first place. This makes it really important for us to have clearly defined job roles in our business with detailed job descriptions and completely unambiguous duties and responsibilities assigned to those roles. But there is a second massive hiring mistake we tend to make. It was definitely the biggest mistake I made, despite the desperation. Desperation is the second biggest hiring mistake I made. The first is assumption, and I have seen a lot of other firm owners make the same mistake. I assumed that if I had bookkeeping work to get off my desk, I could hire a bookkeeper, plop the work on her desk, and leave her to get on with it. A bookkeeper should be able to do my client's bookkeeping, right? Yes and no. A bookkeeper should have the technical ability required to do bookkeeping, but that doesn't mean she does it the way I do my bookkeeping. Because the way you process a set of accounts could be very different to the way that I do. The way I name my files, write my memos, save my notes, compose my emails, the way I handle customer touch points is entirely my own. And you have your own way of working. Your new bookkeeper has their way of working, which is probably a mix of all their prior employers' ways of working. So they are going to have their own preferences, their own workflows, and their own ideas of how things are done, which means that if you don't actually take the time to tell them the outcome you want and the way you want it done, they will do things their way. And that will not necessarily result in the specific outcome that you and your clients are expecting. And this means that in addition to defining your employee's role and assigning their specific tasks and duties and responsibilities, you also need to be very, very clear on how those tasks, duties, and responsibilities are performed. In other words, you need to have a set of standard operating procedures. Your SOPs do not need to be complex. They do not need to be as all-encompassing and formal as a corporate's SOPs. They do not need to involve 3 levels of authorization, and they do not need to be so detailed that they go to the extent of naming the size of page margins for printed pages. Unless you want them to, they don't have to be. But you need to have an official document that lays out the way in which you get your results for your clients. Because for remote work to work, we need to have these things in place in writing. When a chef sets out to create a masterpiece, she's going to end up creating a recipe. Her recipe is going to detail everything required to create this dish, and it will lay out the steps that need to be followed and the order of those steps, including the tools used at each step. If she then follows that recipe to the letter, she can create the exact same award-winning dish every time she makes it. On the other hand, if she does not create a recipe and instead she just cooks from memory, there is a huge likelihood you're not going to get the same end result. She could forget an ingredient. It would be something small, like a pinch of nutmeg, or maybe she won't sift the flour before she mixes it in, or the oven could be 10 degrees lower, or the cook time could be 10 minutes longer. Now, a good chef will probably produce a great dish every single time, but it won't be the same dish. There will be variations of each other. If she's a bad chef, she's going to produce multiple disasters. But the most important thing about that recipe is that if she doesn't create it, she can never ask another chef to cook it for her. She is always going to have to be the one doing the work. Good business systems enable efficiency and growth. One of the reasons that franchises are so successful is that when you buy a franchise, you get a set of their standard policies, procedures, and systems, and you can simply replicate what is working everywhere else. So if you have systems and processes in place, you are going to immediately begin noticing benefits. Staff members are able to do their jobs with minimal supervision, no micromanaging. Because you have clearly defined roles and responsibilities, you will have accountabilities. And when an employee is absent, another member of staff can very easily fill in for them. Training new staff members becomes very easy as well, for the same reason. Your services are going to attain a standardized level of quality, and it is easier and faster to make decisions while you experience fewer losses from mistakes and inefficiency. And the most important part is that there is freedom for you as the business owner to work on your business instead of constantly being stuck in the details and the operations. Good systems enable a business to run without you, without constant interference from management. They make business streamlined and more productive, and they result in a happier and healthier working environment. Ultimately, good systems are what make your business sustainable and more profitable. An effective and productive remote work is literally impossible without them, because your remote worker needs to know what is expected of them. They need to know the steps they must follow in order to meet the expectation, and they need to know where they can find the paperwork and information related to those steps, and what software they need to use, and how they get onto that software. When they know all of this, they can do their job. Now, you can tell it all to them in a training session, but then you are going to have to repeat yourself every single time you bring on a new employee, and you run the risk of them taking bad notes or forgetting things. A set ways of working document solves this problem for you. Plus, it makes your manager's job easier, especially if you're the manager, because now that you know that your employee knows what to do, it is much easier to monitor their work, monitor their progress, and evaluate their results. They cannot use the excuse of, oops, I didn't know. So before going any further with this series and with the idea of implementing remote work in your practice, if you do not have SOPs, stop watching and go create some. I promise you, because I have done it, I know you are wasting your time trying to implement productive remote work without them. Go define your job roles, detail your job descriptions, allocate those tasks, duties, and responsibilities, and create a document that lays out the steps required to do those tasks and achieve those responsibilities. And then put it all together in something for your remote working team members to use as a reference guide. Only after you have done this do you come back and continue with this series. Because if you were about to hire out of desperation because you are overworked and overwhelmed and exhausted, it's not going to go well if you hire out of desperation and allow that person to work remotely. Please rather book a virtual coffee chat with me and we can work through options together. Find me on LinkedIn. Click below this video. There should be a meeting link. Come chat to me. I promise I will work through the problem with you for free. I do not use my coffee chats to pitch our services. We use them to solve problems. So if you are facing desperation and you don't know what to do, come and have a chat and we'll find a way forward for you. If you do have your job descriptions and SOPs sorted, then you can move on to our next video in which we are going to start looking at planning, and we're starting with planning your management process for your remote